Imagine sitting in a meeting where everyone around you is rating your performance in real time on their iPads. Every comment you make, every decision you propose, scored immediately and permanently recorded. That's daily life at Bridgewater Associates, and Ray Dalio believes it's the only way to build a company where truth wins. March 2011, a video leaks online. It's internal Bridgewater Associates footage, grainy, clearly not meant for public consumption. The title, Bridgewater Associates, an idea meritocracy. And within 24 hours, the entire financial world is watching it with their jaws on the floor. The video shows Ray Dalio standing in front of his employees explaining something that sounds absolutely insane. He's describing a system where every meeting is recorded, every conversation is documented, and every employee carries an iPad loaded with an app called the Dot Collector. During meetings, people are rating each other in real time on dozens of attributes. Is this person thinking clearly? Are they being open-minded? Are they letting their ego block their reasoning? Every question gets a dot, green for positive, red for negative, and it's all tracked permanently, building what Ray calls baseball cards for every employee. One scene shows a young analyst challenging a senior portfolio manager's logic. The senior guy's getting visibly annoyed. His face is turning red. And Ray pauses the whole meeting right there, pulls out his iPad, shows everyone the dots being collected on that senior portfolio manager in real time. Multiple people have given him red dots for closed-mindedness and ego barrier. Ray looks at him and says, "See, this is exactly what we're talking about. You're feeling defensive right now. That defensiveness is preventing you from hearing whether he's right. The dots don't lie." The senior guy sits there, silent. You can see him processing this. Then he nods. "You're right, let me hear him out again." When this video leaked, the media went absolutely nuclear. Bloomberg called it Orwellian. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece questioning whether Bridgewater was a cult. Employees started calling it the happiness spreadsheet. Critics said it was surveillance capitalism before that term even existed. Former employees went on record saying the environment was psychologically brutal. But here's what nobody outside Bridgewater understood. Ray wasn't trying to control people. He was trying to eliminate something he believed was destroying every other organization on the planet, the gap between what people say and what they actually believe. The political games, the hidden agendas, the fake agreement in meetings followed by sabotage in the hallways. Ray had spent 30 years watching smart people make terrible decisions because they couldn't handle honest feedback, because their egos got in the way, because organizational politics rewarded people who were good at playing the game instead of people who were good at finding truth. And he decided to build a system that made politics impossible, a system where everything was transparent, where feedback wasn't delayed until some awkward annual review, where your track record was quantified and visible to everyone. He called it an idea meritocracy, a place where the best ideas win regardless of who says them. But to make that work, you needed data. You needed to know who was believable on what topics. You needed to catch ego and closed-mindedness in real time before it poisoned the decision-making process. So he built the Dot Collector, and it changed everything about how Bridgewater operated. But it also meant that working there became one of the most psychologically intense experiences in corporate America. This is the story of Ray Dalio's most controversial innovation, the system that made Bridgewater the most successful hedge fund in history, and the system that drives 30% of new hires to quit within 18 months because they simply cannot handle the level of transparency required. I'm here to tell you about the most radical management experiment in modern business history. And what's crazy about this story is that it wasn't built by some Silicon Valley startup trying to disrupt HR. It was built by a 60-year-old hedge fund manager who'd spent decades watching organizational dysfunction destroy good decision-making. Now I've been obsessed with this topic for the last 2 weeks. I read the leaked internal documents from Bridgewater's culture training, watched the full 40-minute version of that video that leaked in 2011, interviewed 3 former Bridgewater employees about what it's actually like to work in the system. And here's what I found. The dot collector isn't what most people think it is. It's not surveillance. It's not Big Brother. It's something much more interesting and much more controversial than that. But before we dive into how the system actually works, we need to understand the problem Ray was trying to solve. Because without understanding the problem, the dot collector looks like dystopian corporate control. Once you understand the problem, it starts to look like maybe the only solution. Let me take you back to the mid-2000s. Bridgewater Associates is already one of the most successful hedge funds on the planet. They're managing tens of billions of dollars. Their returns are legendary. Their client list includes sovereign wealth funds, central banks, the largest pension funds in the world. By every external metric, they're winning. But Ray sees something that's bothering him. As the company grows, as they hire more people, as the organizational complexity increases, he's noticing the same patterns that destroy every other large organization starting to creep in. People are being polite in meetings, but disagreeing in private. Junior employees are deferring to senior employees even when the junior person is right. Feedback is getting delayed until annual reviews, by which point it's too late to matter. Politics are starting to emerge. And Ray has this fundamental belief, this core principle that's driven everything he's built at Bridgewater. Meaningful work and meaningful relationships require radical truth and radical transparency. You can't have an idea meritocracy if people aren't being radically honest about what they think. And you can't be radically honest if there are social consequences for speaking truth. So he starts thinking about how to systematize honesty, how to make it impossible for people to be political, how to capture feedback in real time so there's no gap between behavior and consequence. And he realizes something. The problem with most feedback systems is that they're retrospective. You do something in January, you get feedback about it in December during your annual review. By that point, you've forgotten the context. The feedback feels abstract. It doesn't change behavior because the connection between action and consequence is too distant. Ray wants immediate feedback. He wants you to know in the moment how your behavior is being perceived, not in a cruel way, not to shame people, but because immediate feedback is the only kind that actually changes patterns. It's like training a dog. You can't wait 6 months and then tell the dog it did something wrong. The dog has no idea what you're talking about. You need to give feedback within seconds of the behavior for it to create learning. But here's the problem. If you're relying on humans to give immediate feedback verbally, it doesn't work. People are too polite. They don't want to interrupt the meeting. They don't want to seem critical. They're worried about social consequences. So the feedback either doesn't get given, or it gets softened, or it gets delayed, and you're back to the same dysfunctional pattern. Ray's solution is to remove the social friction. Make the feedback anonymous in the moment. Give everyone an iPad. During every meeting, you're rating the people speaking on specific attributes. Not vague things like did they do a good job, specific measurable attributes, open-mindedness, clear thinking, assertiveness, reliability, dozens of different dimensions. You're sitting in a meeting, someone proposes an investment idea. You pull out your iPad, the dot collector app is open, you rate them on their reasoning, green dot if their logic is sound, red dot if they're making unsupported leaps. You rate them on open-mindedness. Are they considering alternative viewpoints? Are they getting defensive when questioned? Every attribute gets a dot. And here's the key, it's not just subjective opinion. The system tracks your accuracy over time. If you consistently give someone red dots for poor reasoning, but their investment recommendations turn out to be profitable, your dots start to matter less. The system is building believability weights. It's figuring out who actually knows what they're talking about versus who's just confident. This is the innovation that makes the whole thing work. In most organizations, feedback is just opinion. Your boss thinks you did a good job. Your colleague thinks you messed up. It's all subjective. There's no way to know who's right, but at Bridgewater, they're tracking outcomes. They know who predicted the European debt crisis correctly. They know who called the reflation trade in 2009. They know who's been right about emerging markets' currency movements. And that track record determines how much your feedback matters. Ray calls this believability-weighted decision-making. Not all opinions are equal. If you've been right about interest rates for 15 years, your opinion on the next Fed move counts more than the intern who started last month. That's not hierarchy for its own sake. That's acknowledging that expertise is real and track records matter. So the dot collector is doing two things simultaneously. First, it's capturing real-time feedback on behavior and decision-making. Second, it's building a database of believability across hundreds of dimensions. Over time, you build what Ray calls a baseball card. Just like a baseball player has stats, batting average, home runs, stolen bases, every Bridgewater employee has stats. Your track record on market predictions. Your open-mindedness score based on hundreds of meeting interactions. Your reliability in following through on commitments. And all of this is transparent. You can pull up anyone's baseball card. You can see their dots. You can see how believable they are in different domains. Which means when you're in a meeting and someone makes a claim, you can instantly check, is this person believable on this topic? Do they have a track record of being right about this kind of thing? Now here's where it gets intense, because this system doesn't just track your technical competence. It tracks your character, your ego, your emotional intelligence. Are you someone who gets defensive when questioned? Are you someone who dominates conversations and doesn't listen? Are you someone who says one thing in meetings and does another thing afterward? All of that gets captured, and it's visible to everyone. There's nowhere to hide. You can't play political games because the games are immediately visible in the data. You can't kiss up to your boss and be mean to your subordinates because everyone's dots matter. The system is designed to make politics impossible by making everything transparent. I mean, think about how radical that is. Most companies, you have no idea what your boss really thinks about you until you get fired or passed over for promotion. At Bridgewater, you can see exactly what everyone thinks about you in real time on dozens of specific dimensions. The feedback isn't delayed, it's not softened, it's just there, honest, quantified, unavoidable. When I was researching this, I talked to a former Bridgewater analyst who worked there from 2012 to 2015. And she told me something I'll never forget. She said the first 6 months were psychologically brutal. Every day I'd leave work feeling like I'd been emotionally beaten up. I'd look at my dots and see all these red marks, closed-minded, defensive, poor reasoning. And I'd think, is everyone else seeing this? Do they all think I'm incompetent? But then something shifted. She said around month 7, she stopped taking the dots personally. She started seeing them as data, not as judgment. And once she made that mental shift, once she stopped letting her ego attach to the feedback, she started improving at a rate she'd never experienced in her life. She could see exactly what patterns she needed to fix. The feedback was too immediate and too specific to ignore. By her 3rd year, she was one of the highest-rated analysts in her group, and she said the reason wasn't that she was smarter than everyone else. It was that she'd learned how to process feedback without ego. She'd learned how to separate her identity from her performance. And that skill, that ability to hear hard truths without defensiveness, that's what made her valuable. But here's the thing, for every person like her who thrives in this system, there are 3 people who can't handle it. The turnover rate at Bridgewater is insane. About 30% of new hires leave within 18 months, not because they're getting fired, because they quit. They can't psychologically handle the level of transparency. And Ray's okay with that. He's not trying to build a company where everyone's comfortable. He's trying to build a company where truth wins, and truth is uncomfortable. Being forced to see your own ego, your own defensiveness, your own intellectual limitations, that's painful. Most people spend their entire careers avoiding that pain. Bridgewater forces you to confront it every single day. The media coverage when this system became public was overwhelmingly negative. People called it dehumanizing. They said it was treating employees like algorithms. They questioned whether it was even legal to record every conversation. There were think pieces about whether Bridgewater was a cult. Former employees went on record calling the environment toxic. But here's what's interesting. The employees who stay at Bridgewater, the ones who make it through that initial brutal period, they become fiercely loyal to the system. They'll tell you it's the only place they've ever worked where politics don't matter, where you can speak truth without fear, where you're evaluated on merit, not on who you're friends with. And the results speak for themselves. Bridgewater has been the most successful hedge fund in history by almost any metric. They've returned more money to investors than any other hedge fund ever. During the 2008 crisis, when everyone else was panicking, their pure alpha fund was up 14%. In 2010, when Europe was melting down, they made billions. Their track record is absurd. Now, does that prove the dot collector is the reason for their success? No, correlation isn't causation. Maybe Ray's just a genius investor and the culture stuff is irrelevant, but Ray doesn't think so. He believes the culture is what enables the investment performance. Because investing isn't just about being smart, it's about making good decisions under uncertainty. And good decisions require honest feedback, clear thinking, and the ability to change your mind when you're wrong. Most organizations punish people for being wrong. You make a bad call, it goes in your permanent record, it hurts your career. So people become defensive. They double down on bad ideas. They hide mistakes. They blame others. All of that is poison for decision-making. At Bridgewater, being wrong is fine. What's not fine is being closed-minded about it. If you make a prediction, it turns out wrong, and you say, okay, I was wrong, here's what I learned, here's how I'll think about it differently next time, that's celebrated. That's pain plus reflection equals progress, one of Ray's core principles. But if you make a prediction, it turns out wrong, and you start making excuses or blaming others or pretending you didn't really believe it, you're going to get hammered with red dots for ego barrier and closed-mindedness. The system doesn't punish mistakes, it punishes ego. Let me give you a specific example. In 2013, Bridgewater made a big bet that inflation was going to spike. They positioned the portfolio for rising inflation, and they were wrong. Inflation stayed low. The trade lost money, big money. At most hedge funds, that would be a disaster. Heads would roll. People would be covering their asses. There'd be finger-pointing about who recommended the trade. But at Bridgewater, Ray pulled the entire investment team together. They went through every step of the decision-making process. What did we believe? What was our reasoning? Where did we go wrong? What should we have seen that we didn't see? And it was all captured in the dot collector. Every person's contribution to the decision, every warning sign that got ignored, every piece of groupthink that crept in. They built what they call a learning loop out of the failure. The next time they approached an inflation call, they had a systematic checklist based on what went wrong in 2013. That's what the system enables. It turns failures into data. It removes the emotional defensiveness that prevents learning. Because if everyone's already seeing your mistakes in real time through the dots, there's no point in hiding them. You might as well learn from them. Now I want to address the elephant in the room. Is this system ethical? Is it humane? Should companies be allowed to quantify and expose every aspect of employee behavior like this? Those are legitimate questions. An honest answer is, I don't know. Part of me thinks this is the most honest workplace environment ever created. No politics, no hidden agendas, pure meritocracy. If you're good at your job and you're intellectually honest, you'll thrive regardless of your background or who you know. But another part of me thinks this level of transparency is psychologically unsustainable for most humans. We evolved to care about social status. We evolved to feel shame when judged by our peers. You can't just rationally decide to not feel that. For some people, maybe the pain of constant evaluation outweighs the benefit of working in a truth-seeking environment. Ray's answer to this is simple: self-selection. Nobody's forced to work at Bridgewater. They're very explicit in the hearing process about what the culture is like. They tell candidates, this is going to be uncomfortable. You're going to get feedback that hurts your ego. If you can't handle that, this isn't the place for you. And then they let people choose. The people who stay are the ones who value truth over comfort, who'd rather know exactly where they stand than be protected from honest feedback, who believe that short-term pain from criticism is worth long-term growth. Those people thrive at Bridgewater. Everyone else leaves. What's interesting to me is how this system has influenced other organizations. Not the dot collector specifically, but the principles behind it. The idea that feedback should be immediate, not delayed. The idea that believability should be weighted based on track records, not seniority. The idea that transparency prevents politics. You're seeing versions of this pop up everywhere now. Tech companies implementing peer feedback systems. Consulting firms using 360-degree reviews after every project. Startups recording meetings and using AI to analyze communication patterns. Bridgewater was ahead of the curve by about 15 years. What seemed dystopian in 2010 seems almost mainstream in 2025. But here's what most of these imitators are missing. They're copying the tools without understanding the philosophy. The dot collector doesn't work unless you have radical transparency as a core value. Unless you genuinely believe that truth is more important than comfort. Unless you're willing to accept massive turnover as people self-select out of the environment. Most companies want the benefits of the system without the costs. They want better feedback and decision-making, but they don't want to lose employees or deal with the discomfort. So they implement a watered-down version, feedback that's still delayed, reviews that are still softened, politics that are still tolerated, and surprise, it doesn't work. Ray's system works because he went all in. He didn't compromise. He built an environment where the social norm is radical honesty, where giving and receiving hard feedback is the default, where ego is seen as the enemy of truth. You can't get those benefits halfway. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Ray Dalio's dot collector isn't just about corporate efficiency. It's about a fundamentally different theory of how humans should interact in organizational settings. Most workplaces operate on politeness, on protecting feelings, on maintaining harmony. And Ray believes that framework, while comfortable, leads to terrible decision-making. His alternative is pain-forward. Embrace the discomfort of honest feedback. Build systems that make truth unavoidable. Accept that some people will leave because they can't handle it. And trust that the people who stay will make better decisions because they're operating from a foundation of truth rather than politics. Now, I don't know if this system is right for every organization. I don't know if I could personally handle working in that environment. But I do know this: Bridgewater has been absurdly successful. Their decision-making track record is extraordinary. And Ray credits the culture, specifically the dot collector, as the reason why. Whether you agree with the philosophy or not, you have to admit it's one of the most fascinating management experiments in modern business. And it raises questions we should all be thinking about. How much feedback is too much? Should we value truth over comfort? Is it possible to remove politics from organizations? What would your workplace look like if every interaction was transparent? I want to hear from you. Could you work in an environment like Bridgewater? Would you want to see your colleagues' dots on you in real time? Or do you think this crosses a line into surveillance? Drop a comment because I'm genuinely curious how people react to this system. And if this shifted your understanding of organizational culture and feedback, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're releasing new Ray Dalio deep dives regularly, and the next one is going to explore his controversial China investments and the criticism he faced for being too close to the Chinese government despite human rights concerns. I'm your host for Legendary Investor, Ray Dalio. This has been the story of the dot collector, the most radical transparency system in corporate America, and why Ray believes it's the only way to build an organization where truth wins. I'll see you in the next one.